G'day guys, Alex here. Welcome to the Trademate Sports Betting Podcast. Today I'm joined by mental game coach Jared Tendler, who has worked for some of the world's top poker players, entrepreneurs, and several elite sports people in golf, esports, and pool. He is also the author of 3 books. One of the main reasons we've got him on today is he has a new book coming out. So his recent books have been, or books in the past have been The Mental Game of Poker, The Mental Game of Poker 2, and his new book is called The Mental Game of Trading. Welcome to the podcast, Jared.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it, man. Obviously, you can sense a theme with my titles. I'm not necessarily the most creative.
Yeah, couldn't you think of a better name for the second poker book?
No, I suppose maybe it's just branding, right? I suck at naming things. My wife picked our daughter's name, so I just kind of leave all that stuff to the professionals.
No, it's all right, mate. I mean, it makes sense to most people, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's
you
pretty
get the
straightforward
gist
title
of what it's about.
Yeah, exactly.
Mate, I'm very excited today. As I mentioned to you before we started recording, I'm very excited about this conversation because I don't think we've had anyone on the podcast really. I mean, we've had someone on. I think it was episode 26. His name was Mike Holden, and he talked a lot about about football and the mental side, the profiling side of managers. But I wouldn't say to this extent, but we can kind of talk about get really deep into the mental
betting,
side.
Not so much on the betting side of it.
Yeah, not too much of the betting side of it, or at least he hadn't really thought about it from the betting side or implemented it yet. So. Right. Yeah, I'm very excited about this. So I think the best way to start is to tell everyone a bit about yourself, like how you got into becoming a mental game coach, and any degrees or anything like that.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly wasn't dreaming of this job as a kid. I was dreaming to play professional golf, and that's kind of what started my ascent. I mean, I was a kid who just grew up playing sports and just loved playing tennis and baseball and basketball. And eventually, golf kind of found my way. I was pretty short. I was, 4'11" in the US, right? I couldn't, throw it into centimeters, but, short as a high schooler. And I had to kind of choose between tennis, baseball, and golf, which were all spring sports. And, just kind of thinking of the longevity factor, and had the best shot of maybe becoming a professional, which was a dream of mine to just play professional sports. I mean, I just, watched sports all the time and just grew up playing it. So, got really good pretty quick. I was kind of late into the game and, didn't get a Division I scholarship, but I think by my sophomore year of college could have. But freshman year, I went to a Division III school and, eventually won 9 tournaments in college, was a 3-time All-American, played in 4 national championships. So, I could get it around. But it wasn't really until my freshman year when I tried to qualify for the US Open that the importance of the mental game kind of popped up on my radar. Because I literally played the best golf of my life, tee to green, and just basically choked on the greens, right? Missing putts that were, 3-4 feet. And it was basically the difference between me qualifying and moving on to the second stage, which if those that don't know the qualifying in the US Open, it's basically kind of a 2-tiered thing. All the schlubs like me get in the first stage, and if you get through, you're basically playing like a modified PGA Tour event, because there's only about 50 players out of 156 that automatically qualify. So you've got, very well-named PGA Tour players playing in this second stage of qualifying. So I missed that by a shot, basically because I choked. So that kind of, accelerated my interest in the mental side, and I kind of dove into books and trying to, I wasn't thinking it was a problem right at that point. I was just kind of interested in figuring out how to make sure it wasn't. But then it kind of kept happening. And the more I kind of dove in, the more I realized like the stuff is helping me, right? The traditional sports psychology, we're talking, the late 90s at this point. The traditional sports psychology was definitely helping me play better at every other time except when it mattered most. So I just kind of kept choking in these big spots. And it was like, so I kind of just reasoned that I couldn't be alone, right? And in a way I was kind of being like naturally selected out of the game. Just, I didn't have, kind of the it factor or whatever, some of these intangibles that, people would say back then. We now can quantify it a lot more now. But back then, it was hard to really quantify exactly what the difference was. And so I just kind of reasoned, all right, if I can find answers, then I'm either going to have a chance to play professional golf, or I might have a career and be able to pursue it. So I ended up kind of adding a second major, both to my business and psychology degree, then went to and get a master's degree in counseling psychology, right? Because I already knew the sports psychology side. I figured that, all right, if I can learn to be a therapist and learn to solve kind of deeper rooted problems, then at least I'll have a way of kind of getting at the bottom of what was going on, right? And I'm not saying that my issues were personal, but what I ended up kind of creating was this like hybrid of like sports psychology and therapy, which what I would call, kind of dealing on this like performance level where we're dealing with performance flaws. We'll probably get into a lot more of that today. But the point is that then I got licensed, 3,200 hours supervised practice, yada, yada, yada. And then I quit my job, moved to Scottsdale, Arizona, this just like hub of golf, and just like went door to door trying to find a home where I could, basically kind of bring my brand of, golf psychology and find a place where I can keep practicing and working on my game. Found a spot, ramped up a kind of a client roster, some PGA Tour players, some LPGA Tour players, so a bunch of mini tour players and some good juniors, was making my way forward. And then I meet a poker player on the golf course, through some mutual friends. And this was a guy, so like, I don't know how much you know about online poker back in like 2007. It was like really, really kind of popping, right? So Chris Moneymaker wins the World Series of Poker, and online poker just kind of booms. And so this is a guy who's playing 12 tables at once online, and he's making about $1 per hand, playing 1,000 hands an hour, just killing it. But he had massive tilt problems. Anytime that he would get like a string of bad luck, he was literally just like grabbing his mouse, shoving it right into his monitor, picking up his desktop out of the wall and just like slamming it on the ground. I mean, it was obviously costing him millions, or not millions, but thousands of dollars, and kind of just lost opportunity. It wasn't. So anyway, he and I ended up doing work together for about 3 or 4 months. And prior to he and I working together, he was making around $20,000 to $30,000 a month. In the 4 months after we worked together, he made $600K. And, obviously there's a little bit of run good in that, but for the most part, the biggest difference was that he was now playing almost double the amount of volume because of how much more he was able to play, because he wasn't losing the downtime, and he was able to get in the zone more often. So he was actually playing better, right? When you're not kind of defending against your own anger issues, you can just play better. So, poker, he was a kind of a part owner in an online training site, got me introduced to the world of online poker. And I just kind of like very rapidly kind of scaled up and working with poker, then wrote The Mental Game of Poker. And then traders start picking up the book. So I start working with traders. Then, through a mutual contact, I end up getting hooked up with Team Liquid, which is the largest esport organization in the world. And for 4 years was the head of sports psychology for them. And, was kind of part of their, some of the biggest championships they've had in across multiple titles, and then I've kind of had like a mishmash of other, professionals like the pool player you mentioned, who's won a couple world championships. So it's been kind of and some entrepreneurs as well. And of course, some sports bettors, right? So I've got, a large horse punter based in Australia. I've got a guy now based in Texas who does live betting of football, a little bit of hockey and baseball, both of whom are making, millions a year. And then have a couple other sports traders, some doing arbitrage, some doing, a couple of different things. But it's kind of a mishmash of all things. And, just to kind of pull it all together, my golf game did get actually close enough to start playing some professional golf. And I did start playing some mini tour events and really did kind of solve my own issues. The irony is that like right at the moment where poker was like starting to boom was like when I started playing professional golf. And it's kind of crazy to say, but basically like poker was like the safe bet because it was going to cost me, $200,000 to $300,000 to try to make it as a professional golfer. And, I just kind of weighed the EV of the situation, and it was my dream, but I got to be a little bit of a pragmatist here. So
it's an amazing story, mate. I'd love to ask, like, if you wound back the clock and when you first started working with golf players, when you kind of maybe just graduated from college or whatever you guys call it over there, like, could you imagine like, this whole mental side of things to like, did you even believe in it yourself? Because I mean, there's people out there today which think it's probably a load of crap.
Yeah, no, I think I did get converted, right? So I went from having no clue, as an aspiring professional, to understanding that at the end of the day, like emotions affect decision making, right? Whether as a golfer, whether as a poker player, a sports bettor, emotions affect decision making. They affect, athletes who are competing, and if you're not like understanding the way in which they affect they affect your decisions or your execution, then you're basically gambling. I mean, it's just like it's another form of risk that you're not really like managing. It's sort of the own internal. Now, yes, I think it's gotten a more of a bad rap because you can't see it, right? Except everyone that's listening to this knows very well when they see athletes who just are choking. So yeah, there are that's just like a more dramatic example. But when I'm working with like institutional trading firms or PGA Tour players or pool players playing for world championships, we're not talking about massive problems. We're talking about squeezing these fine-tuned edges, which is no different than them working with somebody on their form for the pool player to work on his break, or the trader to just like kind of fine-tune some of their entries and exits, or the golfer who's working on their putting stroke. It is no different. We're talking about either very small fine-tuning kinds of stuff, or for some people we're talking about bigger problems that really are making the difference between them being profitable or not.
And what's it like nowadays? I mean, I assume it's ever evolving and people are becoming more and more receptive to it. But would you say that, every major sports team or every big player, tennis, golf, they're all looking at having a mental coach on board?
Yeah, I think for the most part. I mean, I'm not going to say everyone, but I think if you've got the cash, and a lot of big athletes now do, just because of how much money is involved in them, and you are somebody who's incredibly competitive and you're looking for every little advantage. I mean, I have a PGA Tour player who's got, me, he's got a physio guy, he's got a nutritionist, he's got a putting coach, he's got a swing coach, he's got an assistant who helps to manage his travel, and then obviously he's got his agent, right? So like, you're talking about even individual sports creating teams of people, right? And some of them also are working a lot with the analytics. So it just becomes harder and harder as sports, as games evolve, to find advantages, and so you're either kind of like leading the charge and trying to figure out how to create one, or you're basically like learning from the others who are going to. And so there's a lot of franchises that have turned to this. And listen, I'm not going to say that every sports psychologist, mental coach, performance coach, is great. I mean, there's a lot of, I think, just kind of recycled stuff that just is, can be very basic. There's kind of different classes of the kinds of things that you're working on. So for example, I can guarantee you any, coach or manager who is worth their lick, right now, either like instinctively kind of understands some of these principles, or they've got somebody that they've learned from and they've learned through the ranks, where you're just creating environments that are meant for excellence and to excel. And you're talking about understanding your players, your athletes, creating the environment to be able to maximize what they can do. And every team and every player is different, so that's not like a cookie cutter kind of thing. But you've got to be considering those factors, because motivation and drive is one of the most important elements. And so if you can squeeze out a little bit more motivation, so every single practice is that much more efficient, then you're going to create an advantage from that. So that's like on one element. Then you've also got kind of like the mental skills training, where you've got the importance of routines and kind of doing some breathing work, so you can kind of focus in more easily at trickier points in competition, or when you're making key decisions. And then you have kind of what I would say is like kind of the bulk of what I do, right? So I am in this sort of sphere of, as I said before, like kind of dealing on this performance level, where we are looking for individual patterns that cause emotional reactions that damage decision making or execution. So for example, these performance flaws can include high expectations. Right now, I'm not going to say by any way that high expectations are bad. Okay, that's just like kind of too basic a way of analyzing it. But high expectations can damage confidence. So, high expectations can create incredible motivation, right? You're driven to be at your best. You're driven to be perfect every single day you go out there. But over time, you're going to continually underperform relative to those expectations because they are so high. And if you are not really, really strong at balancing those emotions, like a Tiger Woods, a Michael Jordan kind of, level of emotional mastery, then those that the volatility that can come, the highs and lows that can create a lot of emotional instability, and damage to your confidence, right? Other flaws can include confirmation bias, right? Where you are motivated to seek out information that confirms a pre-existing belief, right? And I'm certain that this is rampant in the sports betting world, right? Like, you are looking for research, you're looking to have conversations, you're looking for, pieces of information that confirm, a position or a bet that you want to make, rather than just being more of a sponge and absorbing the information and trying to use, your senses, your intuition, your gut for what's going to happen, or a very logical decision-making process. You're taking those inputs in cleanly and making the right decision. If you are, looking for information and filtering it out in the way that you want it to be, you're just going to make poor decisions. So, those are two of like many examples that, if you're unaware of these performance flaws, they will create a fear of failure. They'll create a fear of mistakes, or, revenge tilting, or hatred of losing. They'll create, boredom and burnout and confidence problems. And basically all that does is create lots of ups and downs in your execution. I mean, the most simple way, I think, for, somebody who is either like really skeptical of stuff that I do, which I fully respect. I mean, is to look at your most common mistakes, not the things that happen like once in a while, right? The things that happen, either day in and day out, or week in and week out, or if you're in a bad stretch, that are going to tend to reoccur. You look at those mistakes, and I promise you, there is something emotional present there. There's some kind of a flaw in your decision-making process, because if there wasn't, then you would just continue to make great decisions. So there's something off. And if you start using that as like the first access point, that's where you start to identify, okay, yeah, I'm a little pissed off because, 6 out of the last 7 bets have gone against me in some pretty sick and unfair ways. So, you start to pay attention to the language. And so if it's an unfairness, well, I mean, that there's no fairness in sports. That it's, the variance is a huge part of this game. So despite logically having the correct way to think, in these moments, you lose sight of that. So what does that mean? It means that you have some injustice to it. You have some flaw related to injustice, and that is, clouding your judgment. And that clouded judgment causes you to make that mistake. So if you do that kind of analysis, I think it's a very simple way of kind of getting involved, because we're not talking about, kind of totally changing your mindset. We're not talking about adopting this like, killer mentality, this win at all cost mentality, or, having the right personality for betting. We're talking about very surgically looking at your mistakes and figuring out why they happen, because I can promise you, they do not happen randomly. They happen for predictable reasons. The problem is you just don't know yet why they're predictable, because you haven't looked and really done the analysis, and a lot of people haven't looked, at the mental and emotional factors that can contribute to that.
That's fascinating, Matt. So have you started, you just mentioned before that you started working with some professional sports bettors. Like, how has that gone, and how has it been different, or maybe it hasn't been too different to your work you've done in similar things like poker?
Yeah, I mean, that's like kind of the fun thing. Like, I like learning like a new environment. But at the end of the day, at least, the sample of people that I've worked with, which is pretty small, are, at the top or near the top of their game. I mean, they're making far more than the average. And obviously anybody who's making money is doing far better than the average. So, we look at the characteristics, we look at the mentality that they have, they share a lot of the traits that I see in some of the best, athletes or performers, that I work with. And it's just a dedication to this sort of evolving perfection of their craft, right? They just want to keep getting better. They're just like the athletes, that they're betting on. And so, that's fun to work with, because for us, that means that we can really get into detail and really, kind of pour through nuance. Obviously there's always kind of a startup period where, it may take a few sessions to really get to know somebody and start to create a rapport and, work through some of the basic stuff. But, these guys I've been working with for years. So, if anybody was to kind of listen in on those conversations now, they would think we're insane, that we're spending an hour, poring over some, very, very minute differences in the types of decisions that they're making. But, you look at where we came from, we were dealing with the bigger stuff before, but, their dedication and drive to just constantly, improve themselves is just, it's basically what you see everywhere else. I mean, they're competitive as hell. They want to win. They hate losing, and they'll do anything they can to keep getting better, especially in highly competitive markets where, laws are changing. I know there's, the laws in Australia change in terms of horse betting. In the US, it's tough to find, the liquidity you need for sports betting. So you're kind of playing this cat and mouse game. So, there's a constant kind of juggling act on multiple levels, that they're kind of faced with, and, nothing's going to stop them, which is fun.
Have there been any common themes? I know you can't share exactly what you get into with your clients, but have there been any common themes in the betting arena that people tend to struggle with mentally?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's sort of kind of two sides of the coin, right? So we're first kind of dealing with the negative emotions, and anger is always the most common and the biggest one. And to some extent, like, anger is not in and of itself a problem, right? Some people in my profession say, like, losing shouldn't be painful, right? You should kind of take away, that, and really kind of focus on your process and just kind of nail that. But if you're really competitive and it's your money on the line, which, unless you're working in a syndicate, I mean, it's not, right? It's your money. So losing your money should hurt, and that's fine, right? The question is, does that pain last long enough that it's going to then affect your decision making? And unfortunately, for a lot of bettors, poker players, traders, sports bettors, it just, the anger gets there, and especially because the variance and volatility, in your results can be so seemingly unfair. The variance is so great. It's just really, it's very mentally tough to deal with. I mean, in so many other aspects of life, especially if you've got friends who work normal jobs, or even they're entrepreneurs or whatever, like, there's so much more control you have over, the outcomes of your results. Even as athletes, they have more control over the outcomes of their results. This doesn't mean they're always going to win, but, the variance is far lower, as a footballer than it is as, somebody who's betting on football. So being able to kind of mentally deal with that takes a ton of training. It really has to kind of, identify some of those performance flaws, as I mentioned, in order to be able to deal with it. So yeah, I mean, anger is like kind of far and away the biggest one. You do get fear. I mean, I think fear is somewhat secondary, more so because I think it can be somewhat unknown, right? I mean, I think for the most part, those who are fearful are going to tend to define themselves maybe as a bit more prudent, a bit more cautious, a bit more like just risk averse. And they may think that those are kind of parts of their personality, and they're going to make consistent profits, or they're going to be consistently kind of there. But what they're not going to do is maybe size up and, make as big of a bets as they probably could, given, the size of the opportunity they may see in certain situations. They may end up on the sidelines of a bet that they just, really kind of second guessing when, if that fear, we're going to call it fear, was not there, they would just be pushing those edges and being able to tolerate, the ups and downs of it. But the fear of loss, the fear of mistakes, the fear of failure, right, that really can kind of compromise a lot of that decision making and really shut down that process. I think it's kind of interesting because fear and anger are in some ways like kind of polar opposites, right? So fear causes a lot of hesitation, a lot of second guessing, a lot of overthinking. You're going to go against your gut, your intuition. You're going to have like kind of these like, kind of negative thoughts, and they're going to spiral. Anger almost does the opposite. Anger stops you from thinking. It removes hesitation, right? And so, you're kind of dealing with two different things. And some people do deal with both, right? During a down stretch, they may deal with, more fear, right? As they fear like they're going to go bust. They're going to fear that they're going to be out of the game and looking for something else. Whereas, things are going kind of more normally well, where there's ups and downs, they're going to have more anger out of injustice or just, some normal hatred of losing. Revenge trading, revenge tilt is a big one as well. In the poker book, I outlined 7 types of tilt. They were running bad tilt, which should be obvious, injustice tilt, hate losing tilt, revenge tilt, entitlement tilt, and desperation tilt. In the trading book, I've kind of simplified things a little bit since I've kind of consolidated a little bit. Desperation tilt is really much more about confidence, and like desperation would be that like you just have to win. You will do anything. You're just like kind of auto, re-betting certain spots, not really even thinking at all. You were just like desperate to get a win. That's more of a confidence issue, and it's a tougher one to solve. Revenge or running bad tilt is interesting because it's not about the run bad per se. That's the problem. It's that there's such a high concentration of tilt-inducing crap in such a short period of time that your mind doesn't have the ability to reset itself. So, the way I would describe this is, you have a pretty poor day, but, for the most part, you look at the last month and you're doing fine. You're still up money. Things are going well. Not that big a deal. Okay. Day 2, another, kind of poor day, a little bit of, some bad luck, and maybe you got a late start and the odds kind of moved on you too soon. You just got kind of bad pricing. So, you go to bed, like still pissed off. You wake up the next morning and you sort of feel fine, but you're not quite 100%. So what ends up happening is what I call accumulated emotion, right? You wake up the next day with like 10% more emotion. You're just kind of in the background of your mind. And what that means is that you're just going to tilt faster. It's going to take less stuff to get you over that threshold where you're going to make some poor decisions. And if that keeps happening, it's kind of like a glass of water steadily filling up. You get to the point where it's like you're tilted from like the beginning. Like if like not like the game isn't even over, and like you got to get a couple bad calls, or a star player makes some stupid mistakes or gets hurt, and you've already lost your mind thinking that you're going to lose this bet and all the rest of them in days shot. Like that is accumulated tilt. That is effectively what happens in when you're running bad. Is there's just so much stuff your brain doesn't have the ability to process itself. Which typically happens when you take longer stretches of time off, right? Why does everybody for the most part feel really refreshed when you take 2 or 3 days off? You take a week off, you come back and you're like, man, I'm thinking really clearly. Well, a lot of that can be because you've gotten rid of all that emotional crap out of your head. The freaking cup of water has been dumped out firmly, and you now are kind of fully receptive to process information as you would normally. But when this shit steadily climbs up, right, brain matter actually shrinks, right? You lose access to aspects of your decision-making process, aspects of being able to perceive the information properly. You do not make clear decisions because the part of your brain responsible for that is being compromised by those emotions. So I know that was kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but yeah, I mean, the anger and tilt, or sorry, anger and fear would be the.
And fear, yeah. I want to talk about. I've got a few questions about fear, which I can get to later. But on the subject of just emotionally reacting to wins and losses, do you think there is a stock standard way, like the best way for someone to react to both wins and losses? Like, I guess in your words, like how do the best people in the world react to each of those phenomenons?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not gonna try not to be like coy in answering this, but like you look at somebody like Tom Brady or Michael Jordan or Tiger, and then you look at like Nadal or Federer or maybe Ronaldo, and like you look at the way these guys handle losing. Some are far more, kind of outwardly expressive of how angry and upset that they are. And that works for them, clearly. Then you've got guys who are either able to just like let it roll off their shoulder, or, they kind of take the hit internally and they deal with it themselves. So, we're dealing with kind of polar opposites of what's optimal. I think what you got to look at for you individually is, does my reaction to losing cause more losses? Does it make me more likely to make more mistakes, make poor decisions? If the answer is yes, then you got to do something different. bottom line. And it could be like giving yourself 2 minutes to be pissed off, 2 minutes. And then once it's over, you have some kind of a mantra or something you say to yourself, some kind of a routine, and you just put it away. Now, the problem with that, okay, because there's some people out there who are going to listen to that and say they're going to try it and it's going to work and that's great. There are other people who are going to do that and then they're going to try it for like a week or two and it's going to basically then break and they're going to lose their minds. And it could actually be worse, right? You could be kind of creating this like pressure cooker effect. And so in those scenarios, you need to kind of peel back the layers and understand why is anger causing, or why are losses causing that big of a reaction? Or, you alluded to, what if I handle winning poorly, right? I mean, we see this all the time, right? Athletes, teams, they get overconfident, they get complacent, they lose motivation, they get a little lazy. All of those things can happen when you're winning. And so those are poor reactions too. So, I mean, in my opinion, right, the optimal way that you handle a loss or a win is to have the same process where you review your decisions, or if you're an athlete, you review the game tape and you look and say, all right, what did I do well? What did I do poorly? How did I get here? And what do I got to do differently? And if you do that, regardless of the win and the loss, then you stay on the sort of straight and narrow path where at least you're getting better. At least you're continuing to let yourself evolve and grow as an athlete or as a bettor. There's one kind of tool that I use with clients where I actually have them fill out what I call an A to C game analysis. They actually spend time writing about the difference between their best level decision making, right, their worst, and then kind of what's in the middle. And what that does is, I think, especially important for bettors, for traders, for poker players, because the variance in the short term is so chaotic, right? Sometimes it is tough to know, did I make the right decision? Did I not? If you can articulate the differences between, you at your best, you at your worst, and, average or mediocre, then you can kind of go back afterwards and say, all right, I got destroyed today, but if I look at my decision-making process, man, I was spot on. I mean, look, if you've got a proven track record where you're making money over the long term, you can bet that, variance had a higher degree of why you lost that day. And so, yeah, I'm not saying go home fist pumping, celebrating, popping champagne, but at least you can feel a little bit better that you've got proof that your decision-making was sound. On the flip side, if you had, the best day of your career and you look at it and you're like, wow, I was just crap. Like, did this wrong, did this wrong, did this wrong. I got butt ass lucky. So you can't celebrate as much because of that. So, what that A to C game analysis does is kind of allow you to stay a little bit more objective day to day about your decision making, about your results, because you're not getting caught up in the result itself. You're looking more closely at the how you made, your decisions. And if your how and your process was solid, that can kind of mediate a little bit of the downside, if you've lost, or a little bit of the upside if you've won.
I guess it's a similar concept to sports betting. Like, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose. If you don't beat the market, then long term it's not a good strategy. So I guess you can kind of take a similar approach to your mental game in terms of how you react to wins and losses.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Risk, I think, is a really, really big concept or big topic in this area. And this was one of the questions that I think is probably the most interesting, or the most, when I was writing it down, I got the most excited about in terms of getting an answer for. Do you think you should challenge your risk profile, or do you think you should acknowledge it and kind of maybe stay away from that area? And I ask this because there's certain people that I talk to in the betting industry that say, like, I get really upset when I lose a bet that's at 1.2 in odds. Let's just say it might be a great bet. You might have beat the market, and it closed at 1.1. But you took that 1.2 bet. It's I can't do the maths right now, but it's a very, very, very strong chance of winning, but it loses. So I don't bet on those odds ranges just because I know that, if I lose that bet, I'm going to go crazy. So should we be challenging our risk profiles? And the same can be said for someone betting on, plus, I could do some American odds because we might have some American listeners, like plus 400, plus 1,000, whatever. Like those people saying, I don't want to bet on those because I know that they're not going to win very regularly and it's going to piss me off from time to time. Like, generally, should we be challenging our risk profile and trying to, I guess, improve on that aspect?
I mean, if your goal is to continually get better, then in some ways, like eventually you're going to have to. I mean, I think like any athlete, any professional, right, regardless of the industry, you're making essentially kind of a bet as to where you're going to allocate your time and how you're getting better. So, at a certain point, right, you're going to run out of things that you can do to get better. And if you're only focusing on, just your analysis of how to find kind of the profitable spots, and you're not working on, your own mentality, you're just missing out on opportunity for you to get better. So it's kind of a long way of saying like, yeah, I mean, you're going to have to do that at some point because the market is just going to get so sophisticated. So you're either the one kind of pushing that sophistication or you're the one, kind of leading behind and trying to play catch up. Now, does that mean that you have to do it all at once? Does that mean that you can't have kind of like the Band-Aid approach in the short term where you're calculating kind of the emotional EV of the situation? Rightfully so. I'm not going to take these bets because it's going to not only cause me to, a lot of emotional turmoil, but then I might make, poor decisions after that. So in the short term, yeah, that is the correct decision to avoid, putting yourself in those spots. But if you're able to do the analysis, right, as I outline in the poker book, as I outline in the trading book that's now out, right, if you do that analysis and you really are digging into the cause of that emotional volatility, then you've got an opportunity to correct it. And then you can start to make some decisions. All right, well, maybe I'm going to push myself here for research purposes and just test myself. Because when we're talking about making progress emotionally or taking on, more risk and not having it affect us as much, the only way you can like prove that you've made progress is by putting yourself in the hot seat in those particular moments where it matters most, right? Like I said, I was choking in those big pressure moments. In order for me to prove that I've actually solved the problem, I have to not choke. I have to perform at least not shitty in those moments before I know that my corrections actually mean something. Otherwise, up until that point, I'm just doing the research. I'm just doing the training. I'm getting in the practice, getting the reps so that I can eventually execute in those moments that matter most. And so every single one of the people listening to this, like everybody's got those moments where we underperform. And the scale or size of that underperformance is irrelevant. Nobody is perfect, right? Unless you're trading or betting just a very, very straightforward style where, you're basically just like playing checkers, right? Or tic-tac-toe. There's no real strategy to it. It's just, clicking buttons. Then yeah, you can be perfect at executing that, right? But if there's some nuance to it, if there's some gradation to it, which I mean, I would imagine that that's going to be the case for most people listening there. Then there are times when you're at your best and there are times when you're at your worst. It doesn't matter how bad you are at your worst, right? Relative to the field, relative to everybody else, relative to you, it's bad. So those are the spots where you're trying to dig in, understand the cause so you can devise a correction. And once you devise a correction, that is what you use to push yourself to take on more risk and expand your risk profile. And if it's not working, go back to the drawing board and just keep trying. That's what the guys that I was talking about who are bettors or the traders. I mean, everybody does it, right? We can't always have the right answer at first, but you do some research, you start to figure something else out. And once you have that, then yes, you can start maybe scaling up and taking on more risk and eventually making it just part of your normative, strategy.
And on that topic, do you think people should, or do you have an opinion on whether people should put more effort into improving their weaknesses or whether they should be building even more on their strengths? Because I think it's an interesting topic in sports betting too that I've been thinking about a lot lately. Should I just be thinking about getting even better at the edges I have, or should I be trying to find new paths and working out new avenues I can go down?
So I'll give you a very basic, like kind of simple way of making that decision. All right. If the gap between you at your best and you at your worst is too wide, you're like, and everybody who's listening to this is going to know you're going to either fit in this category or not. Right. When you're bad and you're like, my God, like, how the hell did I do that? Why did I do that? So like, I know better. It's so freaking dumb, right? If the gap between you at your best and your worst is too wide, you've got to like chip away at your weaknesses, because in that case, your weaknesses are going to be the thing that holds you back. Like, you just can't progress. Like, your strengths and your weaknesses in this profession, they are linked. Your weaknesses will hold you back. That is a fact. Okay. On the flip side, if that gap is too small, then yeah, you got to start doing some research and figuring out how to push it. Because you don't want to have that range between your best and your worst be too small, because you are definitely giving up on top end innovation and new ways of making money.
Yeah, and I've always, and onto another topic is, I think you might have written about this in your new book. I think I saw a chapter on open-mindedness and curiosity. I'm not sure if you explored that within risk, because I've always thought the ultimate combination for a sports bettor would be to be an open-minded and curious person, because I think that's how most people get into these kind of things, is because they're willing to get over the stigma of gambling and to start thinking more open-minded and being curious. And I've always thought that mixed in with the element of risk, or being happy to take risk, would be a really good combination for a sports bettor, because they have the ability to explore certain avenues and in the beginning, and then I guess find out that they can make money from sports betting, and then mixing in the risk aspect, they're able to take that first deposit, that take that first plunge. Are these those kind of attributes, are they common trends that you see with your most successful clients?
Yeah, so it's not like a topic that's kind of called out specifically in the book, as because the book is really kind of designed to, systematically solve the 5 big, or the 4 big emotional problems, and the discipline problems, boredom, distractibility, being overly results oriented, procrastination, things like that. But the open-mindedness and the curiosity, I really, push hard on, taking that approach for, your own emotions and your own, changes in your thought process, your changes in your decision-making process, and being really curious and open-minded about what is causing those problems. And so, yeah, people who are successful at any level, or at the highest levels, they tend to be very open-minded and very aggressive at kind of doing the research and figuring out how they can get better. And they have no problem, making mistakes, because they understand that it's kind of like just completing a really complicated maze, or, filling in a massive puzzle, where you're just finding puzzle pieces, and, maybe this isn't the right one, but in the process of, figuring that out, you learn something else that, takes you a step beyond. So listen, I agree with you. Being open-minded and curious are 2 essential traits. Being insanely driven and hungry to be either the best or your best is a huge one too. The ability to be self-reflective and kind of do the kind of the hard analysis and the reflection to understand where you went wrong, understand what you did right, so you can do more of that. I think that's a really important trait. You can, obviously there are people who are just not naturally very intelligent, but natural intelligence doesn't necessarily equate to the hard work to develop a clean strategy. I think sometimes that hard work is sometimes trumps that. And certainly you see that with a lot of talented athletes who just don't put in the hard work. But you get somebody like a Federer, or a Jordan or a Tiger, and you combine those 2 together, and it's just, they can't be beaten, because if you've got the talent, you've got the curiosity, you've got the work ethic, you've got the drive, it just becomes hard for you to lose.
Yeah, you talk about in your new book about FOMO. So for those who are maybe a bit older and don't understand, that stands for fear of missing out. I think we have quite a young audience, so hopefully they can understand that. I think this is a really interesting concept for sports bettors, because you talked about fear before. It can be, it's all about the price in sports betting, but sometimes if you've got maybe you follow a tipster or someone on a podcast who's giving out all these great bets, and they've tipped it at 1.9, by the time you get to it, it goes down to 1.8, 1.7. You know they're good, but and it's all about the price, but you don't want to miss out. You don't want to miss out on that big winner. How do you, like, maybe just expand more on what you talk about in your book?
Yeah, I mean, so it's tough, right? The fear of missing out for most bettors, traders, poker players is not actually fear. What it is this like umbrella term that can mean a lot of different things. It actually can mean almost anything. So FOMO can be like caused by the hatred of losing, right? Like actually missing out feels like a loss and you hate that. So you get in to avoid being pissed. For other people, it's a confidence issue. You get in because you don't actually trust and believe in your system or your strategy. And so you're kind of like constantly searching for these tips because you just actually don't have, that much conviction in your strategy. Or maybe you're just in a period where you've been losing a bunch and you're just looking for something to just kind of snap you out of it and get you on the winning track. So, when we talk about these performance flaws, we are looking for like the reason why you're going to be compelled, to go after a bet like that. And in my experience, there's only one flaw that is specific to FOMO. The rest are all, they're going to come from greed. They're going to come from overconfidence or a loss of confidence, or anger. But that one flaw would be the belief that there will never be another opportunity like this again. And, I say that out loud and everybody who's listening was like, well, obviously there's more opportunities. Like that's what this industry is all about. But in the moment, when you are faced with that feeling like, oh man, I'm going to miss out on this bet, it feels to some like there won't be another opportunity, maybe today, maybe this week, or there's just like, again, emotions have kind of overridden that like logical part of your brain. And there's a part of you that believes that thing is true, that you believe that this is like the last opportunity you're going to get. And of course it is absurd, but that is what comes out. And that's what causes the compulsion to end up making, a bet like that. Everything else, like I said, FOMO is just an umbrella term that then kind of links you into anger, other types of fear, confidence issues. And sometimes it's just a discipline issue where, you just know better, but you want a little action. Maybe there just haven't been a lot of opportunities, so you just do it out of boredom. It can be some discipline problems like that too. But again, because people will just call it FOMO, but it doesn't actually mean that they are fearful that they're missing out. They're just fucking bored. They want something to sweat.
I completely agree with what you said. Like, I have so many times where I'm just so fearful of my opinion or whatever, and before you're so worried about getting in on a bet that you're like, okay, I'm going to stay away from this one today. Like I know I'm not 100% into this bet, and then it goes and wins, and I think that is a worse emotion than, like you said, losing, actually putting money and losing.
Totally.
It's it's a crazy thing. Do you think people can be on the other scale of things, do you think people can be both greedy and also fearful, or do you think is it normally one or the other? And if so, is there like an optimal state? Like is it best to be somewhere in the middle maybe?
So, yes, people can have both. Yes, you can have kind of one or the other. So it's interesting though. We're talking about FOMO. In my experience, greed actually kind of takes on a similar form, because if you think about it, and I think this is the problem. When we talk about greed in society, there's a very negative connotation that comes with it. Like the worst aspects of capitalism are representative in these people who are just hoarding money for themselves and don't, care about anybody else. That's not what we're talking about here. Okay. No one would say that Tiger, Jordan, Michael Phelps. Obviously, I'm U.S. heavy here, but you pick the athletes that you follow, that you love, that have excelled at the highest levels. No one would say that they're greedy in their aspirations, right? Who's Tom Brady to have 7 Super Bowls? He should be spreading the wealth. Hell no, right? No one would call that greed. So when we look at greed as it exists as a performance problem, all we're talking about is just aspiration gone awry, right? There's just a line that you've crossed where your decision making or your execution has just gotten to be too big. And you can look at every professional sports, every athlete can have a tendency to be greedy, right? The basketball player who takes a shot they shouldn't, the golfer who goes for a shot they shouldn't, the American football player who tries to run with the football, tries to pick up a fumble and run with it. Every sport has it. So when we look at like the betting greed, it's just you have, your ambitions have just gotten kind of too excessive, and that can be caused by fear, by anger, by overconfidence, by lack of confidence. And you've got to kind of peel back the surface, because there's just something that's gotten a little excessive. It's not like wholly wrong, right? It's just kind of like this outcropping that's just gotten to be too big. Your decision making has kind of crossed that line. So, then on the fear side, right, it's going to cross the line in the other way, where you're going to like hesitate too much. You're going to stay too much on the sidelines. So where is that kind of optimal point? It's identifying what is your optimal decision making and removing all of the reasons why you get pulled away from that. That's how you find that sort of center point. And the only way to do that is to map that gradation, as I mentioned before, right? Your A game, B game, C game, and be ruthless at identifying the causes of your B and C game, and be ruthless at identifying corrections and working them in, so that over time, right, the frequency of you being at your A game gets a lot higher, and eventually you create new A games, right? Where, your previous A game from a year ago is now your C game.
It seems like from talking to you that all these issues or non-issues that people have are kind of all interconnected together within all sorts of different emotions. So if I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, okay, like I need to improve on whatever it is, like, is there like a simple task that you could get people to do, or maybe you've already mentioned it with your ABC task that you mentioned before?
Yeah, I mean, so the ABC task is certainly the beginning of it. The other task is, just put a spotlight on all of your mistakes and just start asking the questions. Now, in the book and what I always do with my clients, we begin kind of creating a map. And so like basically like what I provide is a system for the mental game, right? This is not like a collection of advice that says, hey, think like this and you'll be great, or, do this and you'll be great. It's instead a system for identifying and correcting the underlying causes of your problems. But to get there, you first have to map it, right? I mean, if you look at your ability to see opportunity in the market and compare it to a novice, right? It's just a recreational bettor. There's a massive gap, right? How have you created that vision, right? Through tons of experience, through looking at betting lines, through looking at different opportunities, losing a bunch, right? You put in your dues and you've developed like vision for this. So I have put in my dues and I have vision for being able to sense and see what those flaws are. Like that is, if I were to sort of simplify my greatest core competence, it's being able to very, very quickly identify what that flaw is. And then, once you do that, the corrections get quite easy. So for anybody who's not going to have the opportunity to work with me, which is basically almost everybody, because I'm not taking new clients, so we'll just put that out there. But you're going to use the book, okay? That'll be your tool. The beginning part of the book is all about mapping your pattern, right? Because the thoughts that you have when you make poor decisions, the emotional reactions that you have, the certain actions you take, the decisions you make, the change in your perception of betting opportunities, good or bad. They all are reflective of what's happening in that particular moment. And if you look at those very closely, you get clues into understanding where the flaws are. And that's how the book is basically designed, right? You map your problems And then you use the book to help you figure out, all right, well, this is the flaw I've got. And, now I can kind of put together a strategy. And so the mapping is the most important thing, because you cannot stop a problem you can't see. Being able to create a map of your emotional reactions, right? Because your thoughts are going to happen in very predictable ways. You're going to have the same kinds of thoughts, when you get pissed off because something is unfair, so what are those thoughts? Your actions are going to be similar. Once you're able to kind of recognize in real time, holy shit, I'm thinking like I've got injustice tilt. Great. Now you've got an opportunity to like put a correction in there, right? If I had that back when I was trying to qualify for the US Open, if I knew why I was choking then, right, I would be able to work through my anxiety and my fear in that moment, and eventually maybe, right, be able to actually execute and make those putts. So that's all this is about, right? You can't rely on the hindsight. You can't say, I knew I was pissed off and I still made the same mistake. If you keep saying that, how are you going to fix it? You got to be able to see it before it happens. It's just like a bet that you missed, right? I mean, you can't say afterwards, I knew, Tampa Bay was going to win the Super Bowl. I should have, bet the money line. No, how are you going to make that decision ahead of time? That's what matters. And the way that you do that on the mental and emotional side is you create a really good map, whether that's specifically the emotion stuff, whether that's the A, B, and C, whether it's, just identifying your more common mistakes and when they happen. But you got to create some kind of external profile, because in those moments, your mind is not operating well, right? The emotions are compromising you. You have to be able to have something either external or something that was external that you learned so well, now it's internal and you can see it and stop yourself in time, right? I mean, I know when I still play competitive golf, I know the difference between when I'm feeling like the performance and the nerves and the amped upness of playing a tournament, which is great. And I don't want to lose that. That's what, helps me play great, helps me get in the zone. I know the difference between that and when my thoughts and my emotions have crossed the line. I know exactly why. And, most of the time I'm able to get myself back on the right side of the curve, and execute close. I mean, listen, I play, sparingly, but, I can still get it around.
I've only got one more question for you, mate, and that was to do with what I talked about at the start of the podcast, and that we had a guy called Mike Holden come on who essentially he done various courses in profiling people, and his new way of looking at things, because he spent so much time in his past coming up with all these data models, but unfortunately over time he saw his edge wear away, which is what most people of sports bettors has happened to them over time, because bookmakers are doing the exact same thing now, and it's hard to find an edge there. So in finding a new edge, he thought, well, why don't I start profiling people or football managers in this case, and trying to find an edge there, in terms of like, if I can kind of predict where a team's form is going to go in certain avenues, because their managers, because I profiled their manager and I know he's saying these certain things that mean the team's going to start doing these certain things. Do you think that's possible in sports betting? Like, do you think, from your knowledge about being able to work on the mental side and the emotional side of things, do you think that could be a certain like game changer or a new wave in sports betting going forward, that we can actually predict teams, players' performances based on things that they might be saying in press conferences, and you're saying, oh, this means that he's in this mental state and that means he's going to play good or bad?
I think you've answered the question. I mean, 100%. I mean, how could it not? I mean, so like, I mean, okay. I took Tampa Bay money line for just the simple reason that, it was the first time a Super Bowl team had hosted the Super Bowl, and Tom Brady can't lose that game. Like, it would tarnish his record to be the only player to lose a home game, in the Super Bowl. And so that was literally the only reason I bet on them, for that reason. And so, am I a genius? Hell no. I mean, I got lucky. I will say that. I mean, I don't bet often enough to have that be my strategy. But I will say that if you're not considering the emotion and mental state of the athletes that you're betting on, or the managers that you're betting on, or the people, the horse punters, right? You're talking about jockeys and trainers and right infrastructure around these horses. I mean, all of these things matter because they're the ones making these critical decisions that can swing games, and especially as the competition, which we all know is happening, is getting more and more intense. Then what are those difference makers that exist in those games? So if you're not doing that profiling, then you may not be able to identify some of the things that can hinge certain games or certain key moments. And yeah, of course, there's always going to be the variance is part of it, but I think there's long been instances where bettors feel like they're getting unlucky, but they feel that way because they are not actually controlling or accounting for the mental and emotional state of the athletes that they're betting on. And if they had a better profile, then I'm not saying that their end decisions may be any different, because you might make the same decision, but how you feel when you lose would be different. And then of course, yes, it does provide you the opportunity to create edges in places where it doesn't exist before.
Because there's just so much, as any sports bettor knows, there's so much randomness involved, and it would be interesting to find out, or at least get some kind of idea on whether all that randomness that we see, that that massive upset, or whatever it is, like is that just all down to mental state, and if we can then predict people's mental states and the way they react to certain situations, then I mean, have we solved betting, mate?
Well, I think what you will find at that point in the game, that if there is that kind of, we'll call it like you've sort of solved the mental state, that means that whoever is doing those profiling is smart enough to actually start working with the athletes, and there's probably a lot of money involved in that. So then you're going to start to see the athletes actually start to change. And so there's no way you're going to have perfect prediction, because you can't always get access to, what's going on behind the scenes. And I can't predict, how an athlete is going to respond. I mean, I had PGA Tour player recently who, had some difficulty in kind of final rounds. I had an esport team, a couple years ago who, they were just like losing in the finals, and sometimes it was in pretty dramatically bad fashion. They started getting labeled chokers, and then they freaking flipped the switch, because we were like literally every single time they lost, we were analyzing it, and they lost for different reasons every single time. If you're on the outside observing that, it's really hard for you to know like what's causing it. I mean, listen, I'm watching this team play. I'm watching this golfer play, and I can't tell why they're struggling. So if I can't tell, then how are you going to tell? And then if you can't tell, then how are you going to know when they're going to flip the switch, right? Because that's what happened with this esport team, right? They were losing in finals. I think they lost like 8 out of 10 times, and then they won 8 in a row or 7 in a row or something stupid, right? And they became the best team in the world because they finally figured it out. And this golfer's still in the process, but I can promise you that he will flip the strips at some point. And like, if I knew exactly when that was going to happen, you can damn well bet that I would put a large bet on it, but I don't know when it's going to happen. I mean, it's just, we can't make those kind of predictions, but on the whole, on the average, yeah, you're going to gain control, because if the mental and emotional factors influence the outcome of the players performing, then of course they're going to impact, your results.
Yeah. Jared, this has been a fascinating conversation, mate. I'm sure I could come up with 1,000 more questions, but we'd be here all day.
Thanks, Alex. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, no. So I think it's important for people to, I mean, your book's coming out very, very soon. It should be out by the time this podcast is out. I'll get the cover. If it's not, then
I'm firing somebody.
I've got for those watching on YouTube, I've got the cover of the book on the screen right now. So that's what it looks like. But maybe you can, just let people know where they can find you, and if you want to maybe mention a few of the finer details about your book.
Yeah, I mean, as you can see from the cover, right, it's a system, right? That's what I was talking about earlier. It's a system for solving problems with greed, fear, anger, confidence, and discipline problems. Those are kind of the big five in terms of the issues that most traders experience, and I think sports bettors certainly fit in that category as well. So yeah, I mean this is not like a collection of advice. There's a lot of advice that is very good in the psychological world that you are welcome to use. I'm not like the owner of like all of the good advice that's out there, but I do think that I've got like a really good system that can become kind of the central way that you organize that material and be able to kind of use it, more effectively. So that's like a, kind of the book in a nutshell. The poker book is out as well, but if you were to choose, I mean, that book was written 10 years ago. This book is like 60% longer. And when I say longer, I mean, like, there's that much more like content that will help you to kind of figure out, what those performance flaws are and provide you, kind of the advice around correcting it. So, plus I've also learned a lot more about the process of correcting problems. Like, we don't get light switches with this thing. It's more like you get like an axe where you're just kind of chipping away at it. And, being able to kind of know what that looks like and measure progress is oftentimes an important piece of the puzzle. So that's a bit about the book, and jaredtendler.com is my website. We've got a blog there. Posting new articles. I'm eventually going to have a kind of a video series that'll come out, and I may restart my podcast. Maybe I'll have you on at some point. And there's also some downloadable worksheets, and I'm as far as social media goes, I'm kind of most active on Twitter. So. It's at Jared Tendler. So, pretty easy. If you remember my name, you can find me pretty easily.
I'll happily come on the podcast and be a case study, mate. You can go through my brain and see where all my problems are.
Talk about your FOMO.
Yeah. No, I think it's, I think the fearful, I mean, that would, when I get around to getting the book or whenever it comes out in Australia, I think the fear section will be the first section I go to, because I think I have almost too much respect for the betting market.
Yeah.
So I really look forward to reading it, mate. But yeah, thanks for coming on, and thanks everyone for listening or watching if you're on YouTube here. If you did enjoy today, please make sure you give us a like, and if you're listening, do a quick rate and review. It would be tremendous, and subscribe. But yeah, thank you so much, Jared, for your time, and I'm sure that, people out there have gotten something out of today, if not lots of things, because, you're breaching a topic that not many people talk about, and something that I'm sure that no matter what facet of life, like whether you're trading or, sports betting or like doing anything in life, like so many of these concepts can be applied to those areas. So, mate, thank you so much for coming on.
You got it, man. Happy to be here, and it was fun. Enjoyed it.
All right, awesome. Thanks, guys.